Welcome back to the XT podcast, where we decode how experience drives business transformation. Today's guest is someone who doesn't just talk about customer journeys, he builds the very engines that guide them. I'm joined by Trent Rossini, Managing Director and co founder of inQuba, a global leader in customer journey orchestration. With over 15 years of experience at the intersection of behavioral economics, AI, big data, and marketing, Trend's work is changing how enterprises engage, convert, and retain customers. Before inQuba, Trent launched Prudential Health in the UK, scaling it to 200,000 customers in just 9 months. He also led Discovery Health's digital transformation, giving him a rare vantage point across healthcare, insurance, and customer tech. In this episode, we go deep on why most journey maps die as static documents and how real time orchestration is the future. What CX professionals can learn from behavioral economics and data signals. The ROI of designing journeys backwards from the customer's goal, not your internal process. Why it's time to rethink how we capture, interpret, and act on experience data. If you have ever asked, how do I turn journeys into outcomes? This is the episode you've been waiting for. Let's dive in. Thank you, Trent, for joining us at the XT podcast. Really appreciate your time and availability.
Thanks, Ashutosh. So nice to actually be interacting with you. We've obviously had quite a few exchanges on LinkedIn. There's so much happening in the customer experience space at the moment, and it's actually, I think, second to US politics. It's probably one of the more interesting spaces to be.
Cannot agree more, Trent. And because we cannot talk about the US politics, let me focus on the CX instead, which is the common passion for both of us, Trent. Let me start with a sharp edge, if you will, which is the conversation that's happening not just around CX, but specifically NPS surveys, the CSAT surveys, and the likes. You have mentioned that while they are necessary, they are hopelessly insufficient. And I love the two words that you used to qualify them explicitly as hopelessly insufficient. I was wondering, what do you think is fundamentally broken in the way we drive these surveys and through these surveys, the CX program in general for the organizations?
Let me start off with this point of view. The first question is, does customer experience management matter? Now, I guess neither of us would be gainfully employed and having this conversation if we didn't think customer experience mattered. So obviously it matters. Obviously, if you engage with a financial institution, if you engage with the telco, customer experience matters, all right? And yet, as you know, and as we see in the market, I mean, there's redundancies in the space, the investment is reducing. So, you look at those two worlds. You say, on the one hand, it does matter, it has to matter, because we know intuitively that you will work with an organization that has a positive experience, and yet the space is not trusted. So that then sort of starts you into a line of thinking of saying, what's going on here? And if you think about it, why do businesses exist? Okay, obviously there's non-profit organizations, but let's just focus for a second on the for-profit organizations. They exist to make a profit out of offering a service to an end customer. All right. And the degree to which an organization does that well is going to make more money. And if they do that poorly, obviously going to make less money. So if you're going to think about customer experience management, your first point of departure has to be, is it making a difference to the outcomes? Because the CFO, the CEO, the shareholders are only going to invest to the degree to which there's a definitive difference. Now, obviously I read a tremendous amount, as you do, on the LinkedIn environment. And actually, if you drill down, you see how few CX professionals actually link their customer experience initiatives to outcomes. Okay. And outcomes in my world typically means revenue, but there might be other elements that lead to revenues. Basically, three things that you want to get right with your customer base. The first is, are we selling to new customers, to a significant number of new customers? Are we selling more to existing customers? And then are we retaining our customers? So is the revenue continuing to flow in? And you have to start your CX conversation there. So for us, and the work that we've been doing, and I actually came from an insurer in my previous life before we set up inQuba, it was all about making sure there was a great experience, but with the intention of getting to the point where there was more revenue. And CX professionals don't do that on a daily basis. There's a term that I like to use. You obviously know Zach Hamilton. It's a term that we've exchanged, which is, I call it pom-pom cheerleader survey-centric CX. So those are CX people that are rushing around going, oh, we've got to be nice to customers, we've got to be nice to customers. Yes, you have to be nice to customers, but that's incidental. What matters is, are you helping those customers get to their goal? Are you helping them along the customer journey? Are you changing their behavior? And one of the fundamental flaws of CX, it doesn't matter which metric, obviously NPS is the one that's kind of in the headlines, is how many people are actually giving you feedback. And the truth is very few, and less these days, because everyone's had enough of surveys and they're tired of answering the same question. So the whole notion of interrupting a customer experience to get some feedback, and the feedback isn't predictive in any way, it actually doesn't necessarily result in a better outcome. That's why I think it's hopelessly inadequate. So it's not that we don't believe in customer experience management. What we believe in is help the customer along the customer journey, make sure that there's value delivery. That's certainly a term that Maxie Smith from Forrester uses a lot, or value exchange, to be fair. Is there a value exchange along the customer journey? And are customers getting to reach their goal? Are they getting their mobile plan up and running? Are they buying a new car? Are they having a great holiday? That's what matters, not will they recommend to family and friends. So yeah, let me stop there because I'll just keep on going
This is perfect.
if
This
you
is
don't stop
perfect.
me.
In fact, music to my ears, Trent, because the moment you said that the true focus of the sales professionals is to help customers achieve their goals, this is where I genuinely draw the line, because I have been in so many boardrooms where I've been told, Ashutosh, help us improve our NPS score. And my first question to that kind of request is, but what do you think will be the best NPS? Increasing NPS by 10 percentage points or 2 percentage points, would you be happy? And they don't have an answer, because what's best, right? And I tell them that, what if you were to measure it against your brand promise? You're promising something to your customer. Clearly they're expecting something from you which will be aligned to what they expect from the product and service that you're offering. They'll have a goal, and are you delivering to that promise? Are you helping them achieve that goal or not? And if you're not, then no matter what your NPS, whether it's great or not, you are fundamentally flawed. You have problems somewhere, right? So why didn't you measure the brand promise? And in a lot of conversations I've been told, well, we don't have a brand promise, or we have something on collaterals on the walls, but we don't follow it through in actions. We are not operationalizing it. And I feel that's where the CX should ideally begin. And I'm so glad you brought that out, and I know that you talk about it at length. You have a term called as customer goal achievement as part of your process and activations and so on. I'm wondering, Trent, how do you make this an activated practice, especially in enterprise settings? How do you make this happen? While it is great theory, how do you ensure this is implemented in practice as well?
Yeah, and I think that is the challenge because, as you say, it's not about the theory of the situation. In many respects, I think, if we go back to the sacrificial lamb of this conversation, the net promoter system, it's a great theory, but it doesn't play out in practice. So let's think about a customer, just get really, really practical. I'm a customer. I want to take out a loan for a new vehicle. All right, so I need some asset finance. I will start on a journey. Where does my journey start? Well, it might start on a website. It might start at a dealership. It might start when a financial consultant in the dealership approaches me. It might start when I phone the call center. But the point is, the journey starts. Okay, so in our world, you have to have a start point, and we actually use data to be able to ingest and identify that the journey has started. And then I progress. I collect some information. I get a quote. I understand the payment terms, the interest rates, the balloon payments at the end. And all the way along, I'm interacting with different channels. So maybe you're sending me some messages as a company. I'm going to the website. I'm going to the call center. Maybe I go back to the branch to have a conversation. Then I need to provide some documentation. There's a documentation exchange. The documentation is wrong. And then somebody from the call center follows up with me. And eventually, through that whole process, you get to the point where I've now accepted the loan and they're going to disperse the loan and I'm good to go. Now, those interactions, we call those journey points. And for us, a journey ends in one of two ways. Either you get to the goal, and obviously that's good, or you drop off, and that's bad. It's bad for the consumer and it's bad for the company. So we've got a construct that says journeys start and they end, and the journey points, and then time is a super important element. Now,
Right.
I'm sure you've seen this with many of your clients. As time goes by, your chance of progressing to the goal obviously declines.
Right.
And you're far more likely to get to the goal if you get to the goal quickly because you're enthused, you're energetic, you're focused. over long periods of time, what happens is there are long delays, you lose interest, you get distracted. Maybe you even get to the point of it's too much effort to buy this new car. So time is really important. And when customers are not progressing on the journey, in our terms, we call it an idle. When customers are not progressing on the journey, we identify that and we actually create data out of inaction, which always confuses people. How do you create data out of inaction? But you can do it. You can do it with timers. And we identify the customers that have stalled and we actually start nudging them. So we want to nudge them along the customer journey and we want to get them along the journey. We want to get them to the goal. Now, so far, I haven't mentioned the notion of customer experience, or I haven't even mentioned the notion of value. But you can't nudge people unless there's a value exchange. All right.
Yes.
So as a customer, I want to have value because this loan makes sense and maybe it's got some embedded insurance in it. And it also comes with a hire car scenario or cheaper hire car or maybe a loyalty plan. So there's value exchange. And what you want to understand is you want to understand how the customer is going along the customer journey, but you also want to understand the value exchange. And for you as a customer, am I getting value from this brand? Getting value from the exchange? Am I having a great experience? Is the price good? Is the functionality good? And what we do is we still collect insights, but we don't do it through surveys. Surveys are terrible things. A survey is an interruption of a customer experience. But if you're interacting with somebody, and let's go to, we're both gents, so we probably spend some time in a barbershop. What happens? A barbershop builds a relationship and they chat and they interact. And that's
Yes.
how they get to learn about you. The ladies obviously go to the hairdressers, all right? Now, how does a corporate get to understand about people? Well, they should chat. They should have mini discussions. Did that make sense? Did you understand it? Is it valuable to you? Not, please, can you answer this 25-page questionnaire and would you recommend to family and friends? Because that doesn't work. And we know it doesn't work because of the distrust that's come from it. So we've got both a methodology and a technology that can take all this data, can build up the customer journey, can visualize the customer journey, and then you can start doing some really interesting analysis because, and maybe I'm going to come across as contradicting myself, we do actually still look at CSAT and NPS scores. There's a big but. We look at it in the context of goal achievement and goal drop-off. And we
Right.
determine if the increase or the decrease of customer experience and what aspects of customer experience are actually leading to goal and drop-off. Now, NPS as an average doesn't matter because it's a distribution. So you can say my NPS is 23. Well, what does that mean? Does it mean, well, obviously you know that there's going to be a whole lot of detractors in that and you've got a whole lot of promoters, but what about Ashutosh? What is he thinking? If he's thinking that, I'm not going to recommend to family and friends, I actually need to talk about that as well because we're actually running a program where we're getting people to do promoting after answering the question. It's not working out so well. The point is, if you understand a customer and you understand their perspective, you can adjust rather than saying, would you recommend to family and friends, which really is, it just doesn't work. You can ask far more practical questions. Is the interest rate right? Do you like the loan? Is the down payment making sense? Do you like our service? Do you like our multi-channel support? And you can actually address the real practical things, and you can both adjust for the person, and obviously that's where engagement and personalization and particularly generative AI comes into play. But also what you can do is you can start to more systemically change the customer experience. So maybe it turns out the forms are too long and there's too much information and you ask for the same information on multiple times. You can pick that up in the trends that we actually overlay on the customer journey. So our primary focus is on outcomes and behavior, and it's informed by the customer experience, not the other way around, which is to say, what is the experience metric and then what does it result in? Because, as I say, it's a complete waste of time. And honestly, I think, Rachel did a fantastic job of coming up with a concept that people understood and it was simple. It just happens to be wrong. So it's a great story. It just happens to be wrong.
Yes, can't agree more, Trent, and beautifully explained, Trent. In fact, the diagnostic approach that we take using NPS and CSAT in CX is akin to going to a doctor if you have a fever and the doctor runs battery of tests on you and tells you that you have fever and it's these many degrees Celsius or these many Fahrenheit. Well, I knew it. That's why I'm here. Just you added a flavor of a temperature gradient now. What do I do with it? Help me fix this. So NPS score is that without the context, as you rightly called out, and you need the context of what does that mean in respect to the goal that the customer has, and is it helping them be closer to that or not? Very interesting trend. In fact, the way you explained, it seems your platform is marrying journey orchestration in terms of nudging customers towards the goals, incrementally driving the right behaviors. It seems you're also using chat for these very nudges. And there's a sense of economics or behavioral economics because you talked about value exchange. There's a lot going here, Trent. I'll love it if you could help us understand how you drive outcomes using a client example, if possible, in terms of how do you marry all these functionalities, behavioral economics, chat, nudges, orchestration, AI, to kind of drive the impact for the customers and thereby the clients.
Actually, what I want to share with you is it's a webinar that's on our website that we did about 2 weeks ago, and it's such a great story. So,
Sure.
one of our clients is a company called Accumulate, and what they do is they help people manage their financial affairs better so that ultimately individuals have more disposable income. All right, so they're a service provider to the financial services industry. And they've developed a whole program. This is completely independently of obviously the work that we do. They developed a whole program of helping people understand both the psychology and the science and the financial management of money management. And
Wow.
the two courses are called Healthy Me and Healthy Couples.
Nice.
So obviously that's good for everyone. The goal is simple. The goal of the journey is start the course, finish the course. They've proved conclusively if people go through the course that they're going to have more disposable income and less debt and better money management. And they've done really well with that. The big challenge is that people have good intent to start the course, but it's hard work. You have to sit through the
Right.
material, you have to do the reviews. Again, people are busy. So we've worked together with Accumulate and we've overlaid our journey technology. Now, this is a slightly different scenario to the one I described earlier, because what we're actually doing is we're nudging people along the customer journey and getting them to do the different modules, reinforcing the things that they've learned on the journey. Again, using chat, using messaging, dynamically personalizing, and making sure that whenever a customer gets stuck, goes idle, in this case, basically not progressing to the next part of the module, that we then intervene and send a message. Now, it's not a standardized, everyone gets the same message at the same time. Each person is managed individually. So, depending on your pace, your progress, your feedback, your points of interest in the program, we dynamically change the messaging content as they're progressing and we interact with them again across multiple channels. So, both in the app from a messaging point of view, as well as some messaging channels.
Sure.
A lot of the markets we're using rich messaging like WhatsApp, and we actually nudge customers along the journey. Now, the results that we get are really staggering. And if people want to drill into a little bit more, there is the webinar. In the short time that we've been working with the Accumulate team, we've gone from a situation of them having 30 positive Google reviews to it's just approaching 700 now. So 700
Wow.
people off the back of the course of their own volition, okay, with a little bit of prompting
Of
as part
course.
of the messaging, have gone in, have reviewed the program and actually shared the incredibly good experience that they've had. And I mean, that's good for the Accumulate brand. It's good for the space. I mean, it's good for society. It's great to have people less indebted, having more financial freedom,
Of
being
course.
empowered. So I love that case study because it's really doing good. It's good at every, and it's good for the financial institution because they've got a customer base that didn't have the disposable income but now does, and they're starting to do better money management, put money aside for savings, take out life insurance, save for the kids university and schooling. So yeah, a really great good news story where we've got some amazing success.
Lovely, lovely, and great to hear, Trent. It seems for digital products as a category, you can truly drive adoption with the right nudges, and adoption would drive value realization. And anybody who gains value is always happy to kind of talk about it. And with the prompting, because I always say, when you have a negative experience, you would shout out from the rooftop. But the moment you have a positive experience, you would say, I paid for it. I deserve to have a positive experience, and therefore I may not talk about it. So there's no harm in prompting and asking them to talk about it, and that's brilliant. I was wondering, Trent, going back to something that you mentioned right at the start. Ultimately, at the end, customer experiences is tasked to drive major business outcomes like retention, revenue expansion, referrals. Primarily, these would be the goals any customer experience leader would love to drive. How do we time such leading indicators like adoption, reviews, and so on to a final financial metric, which is the business outcome, whether it is retention, cross sell, upsell, or expansion or referrals? Would that be more like a financial analytics at the back end, statistical analysis, tying in these two things, or is there a much direct way of getting that financial outcome as a measure of our success directly?
Let me answer that question, but I just want to touch on one thing just because I think it's an important point I want to make. You said earlier that you can drive behavior from a digital point of view, but I really want to emphasize we don't just do it from a digital point of view. And so we've got a bank that we're actually working with, an Australian bank at the moment, and their interactions across the branches. So we can see the loan applications coming in from the branch network, then going to
Nice.
the call center, and then going to the digital space. So we do this across channels. But let me come back to your actual question. How do we manage the financial elements? Well, again, we've actually got a great construct for that. Now, think about a customer journey. A customer journey is a series of interactions. Each of those interactions is a touch point, and organizations can figure out what the cost of a touch point is. So, you know how much it is to run the ad to generate demand. You know how much it is to answer a call or do a sales call. You know how much it is to provide an incentive. You know how much it is to do a new business capture and maybe do an underwriting. If you're going to, for instance, give an incentive of a couple of months of free service, you know how much that costs. What we actually do is we assign cost to each journey point. So,
Right.
think of this picture of a journey with an overlay again of costs. Now, the counter to cost is obviously income, and income gets realized when you get to the goal. All right.
Sure.
Now, goals can take different forms. So it's very obvious and it's very straightforward what the goal is for acquisition, because you're going through the sales journey, and then you've got the product, and you can then say, well, what is the product lifetime value, because we know what the average duration is and we know what the premium is, so we can work it out. And then we can calculate dynamically on a real-time basis. We can look at the cost of the journey, and then we can offset that against the value of the actual product being landed.
Sure.
What we can also do is, not everyone's going to get to the goal. We can take all those other people that didn't, and we can amortize the cost of people that didn't reach the goal
Right.
onto journeys that did. So you can start to look at your total profitability for your customer journeys.
Beautiful.
That works really well in acquisition. In servicing, you can also do this. So you can look at your cost of servicing, and you can actually then start to look at the cost of servicing relative to the premium. And particularly where you've got repeat products, every time you get a premium, because that's actually a journey point, it's a recursive journey point, you can look at the revenue, and then you can start to see over time, you can have a customer, for instance, that has a certain cost for acquisition, but then you get to recover that over time. And in fact, what we do is we then summarize it up into a life cycle view. So you've got all your detailed
Right.
journeys, which is your acquisition, your onboarding, your servicing, your premium collection, your renewal. And then you take each of those sub journeys and you aggregate it up into a life cycle. And that gives you not a CLV, because a customer lifetime value implies that you know what the duration is. You
Sure.
actually need an actuarial calculation. But what we can tell you with high degrees of certainty and high degrees of accuracy, we can tell you what the lifetime profitability of the customer is so far.
Wow, that's really deep, Trent, and well thought through. I really love the illustration here. Thank you so much for sharing with all of us. And one of the advantages I immediately see is the challenge of functional buying, leadership buying, because I know that when CX leaders go and talk to sales leaders and marketing leaders and tell them we'll improve NPS score by X percentage points, they don't give a damn, because for them their KPIs are clear. It's sales targets, it's leads in pipeline and so on, and unless you talk that language, the buying is going to be very difficult. But with such an approach where you are breaking down the journey by stages, by touch points, having an articulation of costs which directly implicate the functional leaders, the buying will be so easy. So this is great to know, and very insightful information. Thank you for sharing, Trent. Another angle which you briefly touched upon right at the start as well, Trent, is the survey fatigue. Nobody wants to respond to surveys. Nobody wants to get the surveys anymore. And especially when there's so much of push to give better ratings, everyone who sends the survey adds a small nudge saying, please give us better ratings. The ratings are also flawed and there's bias. So there's so much of challenge out there. Whereas on the other side, you are advocating something which is far more behavioral. It is more about nudging the behaviors, actions into achieving goals and thereby value realization for the customer and the client. So, is there a way of leveraging passive data, unsolicited data, for all that you do as well beyond the chats itself? And how should organizations truly leverage this passive data when the active solicited data is becoming more and more difficult to get?
Yeah, as I said earlier, I think we don't like surveys, and as a company, I think we've sent many millions of surveys in the past. But we really start to realize that you actually want to have conversations. So yes, we've got the chat element, and we use a lot of text analytics to do natural language processing and pull up themes and then group and to cluster the themes. In fact, we cluster the themes around value perception and value delivery. We're not asking questions per se. We're just saying, are you understanding the product? Is it meeting your needs? And we get that feedback. Now, there are multiple sources where you can get those insights. You can obviously do it from the actual chats that we're orchestrating. But you can also, the technology, and particularly with AI coming along and sort of inculcating every kind of call center, everyone's running speech to text. So you've got all this text coming out of the conversations. So obviously we can ingest that and overlay that on top of the customer journey. Then the other element is people are naturally chatting. So they're naturally chatting on social media channels. And you do have to do a little bit of work on identity matching. But if you do that, as people are interacting with social media, you can then start to pick up the comments that are coming from social media, and you can see what people are talking about. And particularly, people are talking about your brand in your channel, on your pages, etc. You can see that feedback as well. The feedback, certainly is far richer and more diverse than a survey. But I think it's important to emphasize we don't get feedback from everybody. So we understand behavior from everybody because everyone's going on the customer
Sure.
journey and there's data. And then what we do is we do lookalike audiences to say customers of this type within this particular cohort are typically saying these things. So because of that, those people probably need messaging of this type, or that messaging of this type works best for that particular audience. And these customers in that cohort need this kind of treatment or this kind of call center agent. So using predictive analytics, you can then start to get a sense of what are the factors that are actually driving the outcomes.
Right.
I actually just sort of triggered a thought for me is we finding that our buyers, the people that are actually interested in our offering and our solution, are actually not the CX people. It's actually the sales leaders, the
Right.
business development heads, and I think we're starting to make some good progress with CFOs as well. So, and I think that's important because I think that in the good old days of survey centric pom pom CX. The buyer was a CX person that wants to send out a survey, but that doesn't have relevance anymore. The focus is on business outcomes and how that supports the profitability of the business. And I think, don't want to cast dispersions on all CX people, but the really successful ones, obviously like yourself and Zach and others, are the ones that are focusing on outcomes because that's what matters and that's what would have value to the business. And those are the one, I think hopefully we fit into the same ambit of CX professional that wants to see a definitive outcome and hopefully has value and can prove definitively what the ROI is at the end of the investment that the company is making. So if you look at a lot of the work that's happening in using AI, and particularly in customer service, customer experience, typically it's in the providing service context. So either chatbot or automated call centers. And to be fair, I think generally the vendors are doing a good job, and it's obviously backed up by all of the investment in AI and particularly LLMs and generative AI. That domain's working relatively well. There's a big but. That relies on a customer having a need and choosing to interact with the offering. All right. And here's the thing. To my point, customers are not always doing that. So sometimes rather than expecting the customer to come to the AI service, which generally is getting better levels of acceptance, you have to take the AI to the customer. Now, the question is, how do you know when to take a conversation to the customer? Because you have to make an outbound, proactive engagement. You need context. And if you're going to engage with someone, how do you get context? Well, you need to know where they come from, you need to know where they are, and you hopefully need to know where they're going to go. And based on that, you can orchestrate agents that have a purpose. So let me give you an example. We've got a client that's got a wellness program. It's one of the global leading wellness programs. And part of their wellness program is a construct that has you connect your Fitbit or your Apple Watch on whatever device you've got to their app. But you can imagine you've got those devices and you've got an app, and it's complex because there's authentication and it's difficult. So it's a great concept, the connecting, because of the diversity of device. And obviously the app, even the app has two forms, because it's got an Android app and it's got an iOS app. So you need these things to work together, and clients get confused and it's complex. And we actually see in the journey that there's a lot of fall off at that point. Once people are connected, the two together, it works well. So that's a perfect opportunity to take an agent when someone gets to that point in the journey and say it to yourself. You get the AI agent to say, Yutosh, you're at the point where you need to link. Okay, what phone do you have? I've got an Apple device. Great. What fitness device have you got? I've got a Fitbit. Oh, fantastic. Here's how you connect a Fitbit to a iOS app. And here's all of the information. Here are all of the questions. Here are the problems. And you don't need a person involved, but you've got content that's a lot more complex than a normal FAQ is going to be able to deal with. And the agent can be given the task. So the task is very obvious because the goal at that point is obvious, which is get the customer to the point of connecting these two technologies together. So I know it's a very small example, but you can do that on numerous levels. So you can give an agent a task of explaining the interest rate or the payment term or the settlement amount or the documentation required. So you can deploy agents along the customer journey. And we've got some very exciting things happening in that space to actually use AI on top of customer journeys to orchestrate. So I think that's one aspect. The other aspect is obviously journeys are relatively complex. We've been talking about them for a while, and I spent a bit of time explaining how people interact. And actually, when you take raw journeys for customers, there's thousands of different lines. Somebody said to me today, the spaghetti. You make sense of the spaghetti. And that's, again, where AI can surface out of all of this data. What are the key themes? What should you focus on? And can give you guidance and direction to be able to use built-in analytics to actually understand the end-to-end customer journey and pull out the most salient points and the points that are going to give the best results. As you know, as a CX professional, there's always 100 different things you can do. The question is, which ones matter, which ones don't, and where should I invest my time? The old adage that you want to have the low-hanging fruits and you want to grab that, you want to solve for those problems, and progressively you get to the other parts, and hopefully you actually realize ROI from the low-hanging fruits.
Great. Other scenario, Trent, could be where there's an irate customer, somebody who has a huge complaint and now wants to vent out. Now, a human agent would give that time to listen, whereas an orchestrated tool or a chatbot may want to just immediately nudge and push. Or it could be a scenario where the data analytics is unidimensional. For example, I have been in a scenario where the data analytics led a retailer to focus on extended store visit, because the data analytics shows the more the visit duration, the more the spend, which was very counterintuitive to my assumption that certain personas may hate it. Certain personas may want to get in, get out very quickly. They have clear goals. Now, in such scenarios, I see AI is very tricky to be used. So, do you see a possibility where human plus AI as a team could be a solution where both interact, engage, replace each other at the right time, to ensure there is humanized engagement when needed and there is automated orchestration when needed, and both work in tandem?
I can comment on that, I think, more in the medium term. The long term, I don't know the answer
Sure.
because I don't think we know the degree to which AI is going to evolve, and it probably will get to the perfect level. But I can say with certainty over the next year to two, there are so many examples where the combination of human with AI is more effective than AI by itself.
Right.
And we've also, again, I sort of touched on politics, but we're all well aware of the challenges with Grok of late.
Yes.
And you can't leave AI to run right. I think one of the key things I hadn't mentioned earlier, but we don't use a raw AI. It's very carefully managed and it has very tight context. And I don't think organizations are at a point where they can let it run free. And I think it's very dangerous. We're also seeing good examples of junior developers using AI and actually getting bad results.
Right.
Where senior developers obviously using AI get great results. And I think that same analogy applies to the customer experience space. It's great to answer simple questions. If you're in, say, medical health insurance, the last thing in the world you're going to do is unleash an AI to deal with complex matters.
Right.
such as oncology, serious matters of life and death. I just don't feel that the technology is there yet. So if it's a simple example, the one that I mentioned earlier in terms of getting your device to work, sure. If it's a life-threatening engagement, I just don't feel that the technology is there. And I don't think it's appropriate ultimately to have an AI interact with someone at that time of need. And I'd like to think that organizations will be sensitive to that perspective and that they'll use it appropriately. In many respects, and I'm a tech entrepreneur, I've been in the tech space for many years. I think there's a sadness to AI, and almost we're losing something from a humanity point of
Yes.
view. Now, it's not to say that we're not going to, that we as a company are not going to embrace the technology and use it. You have to. But I think you need to be conscious of the human dimension and conscious of human interaction, and rather think about how you can take those resources and use them at the time of need and points of complexity and use them for higher order interactions. And in fact, I think we've seen that. As it turns out, you'll probably find that a lawyer is going to get replaced by AI before a nurse is, because a nurse has got an empathy that an
Beautiful.
AI, I think, is going to take a very long time to replace. And I think the same applies to the customer experience. But a very long way of saying I agree wholeheartedly. Use it with circumspect, use it prudently, use it appropriately, but don't replace the human dimension. I think you'll actually land up with some very, very irate customers, and even worse when it gets the situation wrong.
Absolutely. There's so much wisdom in that answer, Trent. Thank you for a cautionary note, which was layered with kind of advisory as well as optimism. Thank you. Thank you for all the wonderful insights. Really appreciate your time on the show. And I really look forward to another where I get to ask other questions that I've yet to ask and not I have not been able to cover in the episode. Thank you so much, Trent, once again for being on the show.
Only a pleasure, and yeah, thanks. Just keep the exchange going on LinkedIn. We'll convert the CX professionals of the world into outcomes focused individuals that truly make an impact. So very exciting space,
Absolute
going through a lot of turbulence, and yeah, thank you for reaching out, and thanks for the opportunity to chat.
pleasure.